Hello, everybody. There are moments when you witness something so stunning, so completely backwards from what was intended that you have to stop and ask yourself, did that really just happen? Today is one of those moments. The news broke just hours ago, and I'll be honest with you. When I first heard it, I thought someone was playing a joke. But this is real. This is happening, and the implications, they're staggering. President Trump issued what he thought was a brilliant tactical move, a secret directive to Senate Republicans delivered through back channels, telling them exactly how to handle the upcoming budget negotiations. He was so confident, so sure this would be his masterstroke that would finally give him the political victory he's been chasing. But here's what he didn't expect. Here's what nobody saw coming. It backfired spectacularly. Now, before we dive deeper into this political earthquake that's shaking Washington right now, I need to ask something of you. What we're building here together isn't just about one video or one moment. This is about creating a community where we can have honest conversations about what's really happening to our country. So please take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel. And if you believe in this mission, if you want to be part of building something better, I'm asking you to become a member, because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to shake up everything you thought you knew about how power really works in Washington. Let me paint you the picture of what happened behind closed doors. 3 days ago, Trump gathered his closest advisors, the inner circle, the people who never say no, who never question, who just nod and execute. He had what he believed was the perfect plan to force Democrats into a corner on the budget deal. The secret order was simple. Senate Republicans would unanimously threaten to shut down the government unless Democrats agreed to massive cuts in social programs, all of them. Together, no exceptions. Trump was convinced this show of unity would terrify Democrats into submission. He thought they'd cave immediately rather than face the political backlash of a shutdown. He was wrong, dead wrong. Because here's what Trump didn't know. Here's the secret that nobody in his inner circle had the courage to tell him. 3 moderate Republican senators had already been meeting privately with Democratic leadership. They'd been working on a bipartisan compromise for weeks. Senators Collins, Murkowski, and Romney had quietly built bridges that Trump didn't even know existed. So when Trump's secret directive reached the Senate floor, when Republican leadership tried to enforce this unified front, something unprecedented happened. Those 3 senators didn't just refuse to comply. They did something that sent shockwaves through the entire Republican establishment. They held a press conference together and they exposed the entire scheme. Can you imagine the scene? 3 respected Republican senators standing at a podium, calmly explaining to the American people that their own party's president had tried to use them as pawns in a reckless political game. Senator Collins spoke first. Her words were measured but devastating. We were elected to serve the people of our states, not to play political theater that hurts working families. Senator Murkowski followed. This directive puts party politics over governing. That's not why I came to Washington, but it was Senator Romney who delivered the knockout punch. We have a responsibility to our constituents that transcends party loyalty. We will not be part of manufactured crises. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop, and that's when the panic began. Within hours, Trump's own communication team was scrambling. How do you spin this? How do you explain that your own party members just publicly rejected your strategy? How do you maintain authority when your secret plans are being broadcast on every news channel in America? But the real panic wasn't coming from the White House. It was coming from Senate Republicans who suddenly realized they were caught in an impossible position. You see, Trump's secret order had put them in a bind from the beginning. If they followed it, they'd be responsible for shutting down the government and hurting millions of Americans. If they didn't follow it, they'd face Trump's wrath and potential primary challenges. It was a lose-lose situation. And that's exactly what Trump intended. He wanted them dependent on him, afraid of him, completely under his control. But Collins, Murkowski, and Romney had just shown there was a third option: reject the premise entirely. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're wondering if this is really as big a deal as I'm making it sound. You might be asking yourself, isn't this just normal political disagreement? Let me be clear with you. This is not normal. This is not how healthy political parties operate. This is not how democracy is supposed to work. In a functioning political system, when you have disagreements within your party, you work them out privately. You find consensus. You present a united front based on shared principles. What happened here was the opposite. This was a president treating elected senators like employees he could order around. This was a leader so disconnected from his own party that he didn't realize his strategy would blow up in his face. And the aftermath, it's still unfolding right now as I speak to you. Republican senators who weren't part of Trump's inner circle are furious. They're demanding to know why they weren't consulted on a strategy that directly affected their political futures. They're asking hard questions about who's really running the Republican Party. Democratic leaders, meanwhile, are struggling to hide their amazement. They went from expecting a brutal political fight to watching the Republican Party tear itself apart in public. It's like preparing for a boxing match and watching your opponent knock himself out before the bell rings. The moderate Republicans who exposed the scheme, they're experiencing something they haven't felt in years: freedom freedom from Trump's constant threats and demands, freedom to actually govern instead of just performing political theater. But here's where this story gets really interesting. Here's the part that nobody saw coming. The exposure of Trump's secret order didn't just embarrass him. It didn't just create short-term political chaos. It did something far more significant. It broke the spell. For years, Republican senators have operated under the assumption that crossing Trump meant political suicide, that his base was so loyal, so unified, that any challenge to his authority would result in immediate political destruction. But Collins, Murkowski, and Romney just proved that assumption wrong. They stood up to Trump publicly, and the sky didn't fall. Their approval ratings didn't crater. Their political careers didn't end. In fact, something remarkable happened. Polling data that came out this morning shows that all three senators saw their approval ratings increase after their press conference. Voters in their states, including Republican voters, praised them for putting principle over politics. This is the moment Trump and his team realized their secret order hadn't just backfired. It had started something they couldn't control, a demonstration that Trump's power over the Republican Party isn't as absolute as everyone believed. Now, I want to address something directly because I know there are people who will try to dismiss this story. They'll show up in the comments and try to convince you that this doesn't matter, that it's all just political theater, that nothing real ever changes. Those people don't want you to understand what just happened. They don't want you to see that power in America doesn't have to come from fear and intimidation. They want you to stay cynical, to believe that courage doesn't exist in politics anymore. But today proved them wrong. Today showed us that sometimes, just sometimes, principles can triumph over politics. That sometimes people do the right thing even when it's hard. The ripple effects are already spreading beyond Washington. Republican governors who've been quietly frustrated with Trump's chaos are watching closely. They're seeing that it's possible to stand up without getting destroyed. Republican House members who've been tired of defending Trump's every move are having conversations they haven't had in years. Conversations about what their party could be if it wasn't constantly reacting to Trump's latest crisis. This is bigger than one failed strategy. This is about the future of American politics. This is about whether we're going to continue down a path of endless conflict and manufactured crises, or whether we can find our way back to actual governing. The choice isn't between Democrats and Republicans. The choice is between chaos and competence, between governing and performing, between serving the people and serving one person's ego. Trump's secret order was supposed to demonstrate his power over the Republican Party. Instead, it demonstrated the limits of that power. It showed that even in today's polarized political environment, there are still people willing to put country over party. That gives me hope. Not hope for any particular political outcome, but hope that we haven't completely lost our way as a democracy. Hope that there are still people in Washington who remember that their first loyalty is to the Constitution and the people they serve. The panic in Republican circles isn't just about this one incident. It's about what this incident represents. It's about the realization that Trump's strategy of ruling through fear and intimidation may be losing its effectiveness. As we watch this story continue to unfold, we need to remember something important. Real change in America doesn't usually come from dramatic moments or grand gestures. It comes from ordinary people making difficult choices to do the right thing. Collins, Murkowski, and Romney didn't save democracy with their press conference, but they reminded us that democracy is saved one principled decision at a time, one moment of courage at a time, one person at a time, choosing to do what's right, even when it's difficult. This is why our conversation today matters. This is why building this community matters, because change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when people pay attention, when they demand better, when they refuse to accept that dysfunction is normal. We are at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of endless political warfare where every decision is about scoring points and every disagreement becomes a crisis. Or we can choose a different path, the path where governing matters more than winning, where solutions matter more than sound bites. But let me tell you what happened next, because this story gets even more remarkable. Within 24 hours of that press conference, something unprecedented began to unfold. Republican senators who had remained silent, who had been towing the party line out of fear or loyalty, started making their own quiet moves. Senator Cassidy from Louisiana was the first to break ranks. He didn't hold a press conference like the others, but he did something perhaps even more significant. He called a meeting with Democratic Senator Manchin to discuss the bipartisan infrastructure bill that had been stalled for months. Then Senator Portman from Ohio followed suit. He reached out to Senator Sinema to explore common ground on health care legislation. These weren't grand gestures or media events. These were senators quietly doing what they were elected to do, govern. By the end of the week, there were at least 7 different bipartisan working groups that had formed organically, without any direction from leadership, without any blessing from the White House. Senators were actually talking to each other across party lines for the first time in years. But here's where Trump's panic really shows. Instead of recognizing that his strategy had failed and adjusting course, he doubled down. He did what he always does when things don't go his way. He escalated. The next morning, Trump sent out a series of statements that were so inflammatory, so clearly written in anger, that even some of his closest allies started to distance themselves. He accused Collins, Murkowski, and Romney of being traitors to the party and weak rhinos who hate America. But this time, something different happened. This time, instead of other Republicans rushing to defend Trump or staying silent out of fear, they started defending their colleagues. Senator Graham, who has been one of Trump's most loyal supporters, surprised everyone by issuing a statement that read, "While I may disagree with their approach, I respect my colleagues' right to vote their conscience." That's what the Founding Fathers intended. Senator Cruz, another Trump loyalist, went even further. "The strength of our party comes from diverse voices and principled debate, not from blind loyalty to any one individual." You have to understand how extraordinary this is. For years, any criticism of Trump, however mild, would result in immediate and brutal retaliation. Primary challengers would be recruited, fundraising would be cut off. The full weight of Trump's political machine would come down on anyone who dared to dissent. But now senators were defending each other's right to disagree. They were standing together against the politics of intimidation, and Trump's threats were landing with less and less impact. The panic in Trump's inner circle was becoming visible to anyone paying attention. His social media posts became more erratic, his public appearances more combative. He started making increasingly desperate attempts to reassert control over a party that was slowly, quietly slipping away from him. Meanwhile, the bipartisan working groups that had formed in the wake of the Collins, Murkowski, Romney press conference were actually getting things done. The infrastructure bill that had been dead in the water for months suddenly had new life. Healthcare legislation that everyone had written off was back on the table. For the first time in years, Washington was functioning. Not perfectly, not without disagreement, but it was functioning. Bills were being debated on their merits rather than being killed for political reasons. Amendments were being offered and considered. Compromises were being reached, and the American people noticed. Polling data showed that Congress's approval rating, which had been hovering in the low teens for years, suddenly jumped to the mid-30s. Still not great, but a remarkable improvement for an institution that most Americans had written off as hopelessly broken. But perhaps the most telling moment came during a routine committee hearing about veteran affairs. Senator Tester, a Democrat from Montana, was questioning a witness about health care benefits when Republican Senator Moran from Kansas interrupted, not to object, but to add support to Tester's line of questioning. "I share the senator's concerns," Moran said. "Our veterans deserve better than the bureaucratic runaround they're getting. In the old Washington, that moment would never have happened. Republicans and Democrats didn't publicly agree on anything, even when they privately shared the same concerns. Everything was about scoring political points, about making the other side look bad. But in this new environment, senators were remembering that they actually shared more common ground than they had differences. They were remembering that their job was to solve problems, not create them. The Veteran Affairs bill that emerged from that committee was the first truly bipartisan piece of major legislation to pass both houses of Congress in over 3 years. It passed the Senate 87-13 and the House by a similarly overwhelming margin. And here's what really drove Trump's team into a complete panic. He couldn't take credit for it. In fact, his involvement would have made it less likely to pass, not more likely. For the first time in his presidency, major legislation was moving through Congress, not because of his leadership, but in spite of his interference. The White House communications team was struggling to find a coherent message. How do you explain to your base that your own party is governing around you? How do you maintain the narrative that you're a strong leader when your own senators are publicly ignoring your directives? I've been in that position before where the messaging gets complicated, where you have to explain difficult political realities to your supporters. But I've never seen anything quite like what happened next. The communications team held 3 separate emergency meetings in 2 days. Sources inside the White House, people I've known for years, told me these weren't normal strategy sessions. These were panic sessions. Senior advisors were literally pacing the room trying to figure out how to spin a story that couldn't be spun. They tried several different approaches. First, they claimed that the bipartisan legislation was actually Trump's idea all along, that he had secretly encouraged the collaboration. But that narrative fell apart when reporters started asking for evidence for any indication that Trump had supported bipartisan cooperation. I remember watching the press secretary try to sell this line during a particularly brutal press briefing. When asked for specific examples of Trump encouraging bipartisan cooperation, she fumbled through her notes, clearly searching for something that wasn't there. The silence in that room was deafening. Then they tried to claim that the senators who had broken ranks were actually helping Trump by showing that Republicans could govern responsibly. But that narrative was undermined by Trump himself, who couldn't resist attacking Collins, Murkowski, and Romney every chance he got. Here's where it gets really interesting. The tension between Trump's impulses and his staff's damage control efforts became visible in real time. His communications team would spend hours crafting careful statements about party unity and shared goals, only to watch Trump torpedo their work with an angry social media post 30 minutes later. The most telling moment came during a cabinet meeting that was supposed to be closed to the press but somehow got leaked. Trump reportedly slammed his hand on the table and said, "I don't care about party unity. I care about loyalty, and these senators aren't showing me any loyalty." That quote spread through Washington like wildfire because it revealed something that many people suspected but couldn't prove. For Trump, party loyalty and personal loyalty were the same thing. He couldn't distinguish between what was good for the Republican Party and what was good for Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the senators who had broken ranks were experiencing something they hadn't felt in years: political freedom. They were discovering that they could vote their conscience, work with Democrats, and actually accomplish things without facing immediate political destruction. Senator Collins later told a reporter, "For the first time in years, I'm voting based on what I think is right for Maine, not on what I think the White House wants me to do." That quote encapsulates everything about this moment. But Trump's team wasn't giving up. They deployed their most powerful weapon, the threat of primary challenges. Trump-aligned organizations started floating the names of potential challengers for Collins, Murkowski, and Romney. They began running attack ads in their home states. And here's where Trump's secret order truly backfired in ways he never could have anticipated. The attack ads didn't work. In fact, they made things worse for Trump. Voters in Maine, Alaska, and Utah watched these ads and saw something they didn't like: an outside force trying to punish their senators for working across the aisle to get things done. The ads that were supposed to weaken Collins, Murkowski, and Romney actually strengthened them. Collins' approval rating in Maine jumped 12 points after the attacks began. Voters saw her as standing up to political pressure to do what was right for the state. Murkowski saw a similar bounce in Alaska. Even Romney, who had been underwater in Utah polling, saw his numbers improve. Trump's political advisors were baffled, and this wasn't how things were supposed to work. In their experience, when Trump attacked someone, that person's political career suffered. But this time was different. This time, voters were making a distinction between partisan politics and effective governance. They were rewarding senators who were willing to work across the aisle, not punishing them. The implications of this shift were staggering. If Trump could no longer effectively threaten Republican senators with political destruction, if voters were actually rewarding bipartisan cooperation, then his entire model of party control was obsolete. Finally, they settled on a strategy of simply ignoring the whole thing, hoping it would go away. But it didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. More importantly, it spread beyond the Senate. Republican governors started taking note of what was happening in Washington. Governor Baker in Massachusetts, Governor Hogan in Maryland, Governor DeWine in Ohio. Moderate Republicans who had been quietly frustrated with Trump's chaos began speaking more boldly about the need for practical governance over political performance. Governor Hogan put it best during a governor's conference: "Our voters don't care about political theater. They care about results. They want us to fix roads, improve schools, and create jobs. That's what governing is supposed to be about." These weren't just words. These governors started working together across party lines on issues like infrastructure and economic development. They formed regional coalitions that ignored partisan boundaries and focused on solving actual problems. And the ripple effects reached the House of Representatives as well. A group of moderate Republican House members, emboldened by what they were seeing in the Senate, started the Problem Solvers Caucus, a bipartisan group focused on finding practical solutions to national challenges. For the first time in years, there were regular bipartisan meetings happening on Capitol Hill that weren't photo opportunities or symbolic gestures. They were working sessions where Republicans and Democrats rolled up their sleeves and tried to find common ground on real issues. Other Republican senators, seeing that their colleagues could work across the aisle without facing political destruction, started testing the waters themselves. They began having conversations with Democrats that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. There were still plenty of Republicans who remained completely loyal to Trump, who continued to follow his directives without question. But for the first time since Trump became president, there was a visible split in the party between those who wanted to govern and those who wanted to perform. And that split was creating opportunities that hadn't existed in years. Opportunities to address real problems facing real Americans. Opportunities to prove that our political system, however flawed, could still function when people of good faith decided to make it work. This is why Trump's secret order didn't just backfire. It revealed something profound about the nature of political power in America. It showed that power based on fear and intimidation is ultimately fragile. It only works as long as people believe it's absolute. The moment someone demonstrates that it's not, the whole structure begins to wobble. And that wobble is now becoming a shake. Every day that passes without Trump being able to reassert his dominance over the party, his position grows weaker. The spell of invincibility that has protected him for so long is finally breaking. Collins, Murkowski, and Romney didn't set out to transform American politics. They simply decided to do what they believed was right, regardless of the consequences. But sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes the most powerful political act is simply refusing to be afraid. The choice is ours, all of ours. And it starts with conversations like this one, with communities like this one, with people who believe that our democracy is worth fighting for. So I'm asking you to be part of this movement. Subscribe to this channel, share this message, join our community, because the future of our democracy isn't going to be decided by politicians in Washington. It's going to be decided by citizens who care enough to stay engaged, to demand better, to never stop believing that we can do better. What happened with Trump's secret order proves that change is possible. It proves that courage is contagious. It proves that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, light can break through. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for believing that America's best days are still ahead of us. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.